Excited to have a special co-host today, David Chametzky. David, you're a podcaster as well, and I know you're excited about our guest today. Thanks again, David, for stopping by.
Yeah, I'm so excited to hear about the new book, Running Mates. And I wrote my first fiction book last year, so I'm really love the idea. I mean, I guess it might be easier for you because you're a female. So my protagonist also was a woman, and it was a little tougher for me.
Yes, yes.
So Emily Locker joins the show, author of Running Mates. Emily, thanks for stopping by. How did you come up with the idea for the book? Kind of give us the reason why.
Okay, so it's actually a very unusual way to find inspiration for a YA romance novel, but I'd wanted to be a published author for a very long time. And the feedback I was getting was you need a really good hook. And so I found this hook in a very unusual place, which was when I was moving back to Washington, D.C. with my husband and two small kids in my son's nursery school class. Of a class of just 15 kids, we had Mike Pence's old speechwriter and President Obama's old speechwriter in the same class. And at first I was like, how is this going to work? But by the end of the year, through birthday parties and parent events and family events, everyone got along very well. And I was like, there's my idea, Romeo and Juliet for the modern time.
Wow. I mean, that's so we're going to have to get you back to your background, but go ahead, David, with your first question.
Yeah. So let's about your background. Your background is in psychotherapy, right? So you kind of knew the dynamics as you're watching these children earlier. How does that happen and then turn into a book?
So I actually think psychotherapy and writing are more connected than people think, right? Because in psychotherapy, we have to hear our patients' internal worlds, right? Which makes creating a character so much more dynamic, because usually we just hear kind of what people say to us, and that can be, their social self. But in the therapy room, we hear all their anxieties, all their fears. So that's great for, building character. And also just that I think in therapy, we think about what grounds us, what gives us mental peace. And often that is something like a romance novel or a romantic comedy, what allows us to escape and kind of break from our thoughts, heavier thoughts of the day. So I think that's kind of, I've always loved human nature, and I've always loved writing and romantic comedies. And I found a way to combine them all, which was really so much fun.
And I think that when you think about specifically a romantic comedy as a book, that's different, right? I mean, I don't know how many of them are out there that you add those two components, right? And we know romance novels are really popular, but this is a little different. Romance with comedy. Again, a rom-com for books. I mean, are there a lot of those out there?
I think there's a big genre. They're just called different things, right? So I think a lot of the times in a romance, so there's romances that are more what we call steamy, right? Which really focus more on the steam. They have 5 chili peppers next to them. And then there's the romantic comedies, which I think is something that indicates to the reader that, we are going to take you to a place that is fun, that is romantic, but we're going to keep it light. And if you think about it, there's nothing more awkward than falling in love. We have so much experience in other parts. We have so much experience being a kid, being a friend, but there's very few times we really have experienced dating or falling in love. And I think some of our most awkward encounters happen from that. And the key to awkwardness is to having a sense of humor. So I think that's kind of the appeal of it.
Yeah, and your book takes place as teenagers. So not only there's that awkward love that we all understand, but it's also moving together. But it's also, diving into your book a little bit, it is talking about the political environment, which we all probably need that little rom-com idea of it, because we can then have those conversations. Having those conversations are really powerful. How'd you kind of weave that story?
So, I think it was really challenging, especially for the youth. The youth is so passionate about what's happening now, as they should be. It affects them more than anybody. And, I think we are in a more politicized world than ever before. You see, especially with social media and people posting their views and digesting information so quickly. And in my book, in Running Mates, it's set in a fictional town in North Carolina where, because there's a research hospital and a university, but it's in the South, half the town, the east side, is liberal, and the other half, the north side, is conservative. And usually these sides really keep to themselves. But in this book, I explore how two people who, even though they grew up in the same town, in the same small school, never had much to do with each other until they ended up in a running club together. And they find all the things they do have in common, and fall in love. But it's really about what spaces allow us to be with people who think differently. I think we are in less and less of those spaces, and how important it is to be face to face with people just like my nursery school experience, or for Anna and Gabe's case, like this running club, that allow us to be with people as parents, as athletes, and not just as political views, and how much unity that can bring.
And I think that I find this very, very fascinating, the fact that we need to figure out, even if we have different political views, how we can get along. Like, I interview all different types of people on my show, especially from celebrities to also people that have conservative leanings. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I say, well, how can you have that person on your show? Well, it's because I'm a journalist and I want to provide both sides. I want fair and balance. We want people all have an opportunity to have their say. And it's too bad that we have an environment where we can't get along, conservatives and liberals, and or even in the center. Anyone has a different political view or different view. Why can't we get along, regardless of our beliefs?
Absolutely. And I think the work is such a great example, because when they're a guest on your show, you're hosting them. And I think that right away puts us in a more empathetic framework, where we aren't just there to challenge them, but we're there to make them feel comfortable and to hear them out. And I think these are the environments we need more of. So we are forced to listen, not feel afraid. We don't have to agree with what someone's saying to listen. And I think that's where people get confused. Listening is not agreeing, and it's okay to listen without agreeing.
Right. And also I've been talking to my daughters about the stigmas, right? So I said to one of my daughters, I go, You're very liberal way of thinking." And she automatically took it to the political part. And I go, that has nothing to do with political. I go, liberal is, we're understanding of people. We listen to what they say and find the safe spaces like that running club.
Absolutely. And I think a parent-child relationship is so interesting, because I think before we got so politicized, there was nothing more relatable than a kid coming home with radical ideas or a radical way of doing things, dating, and the parent had to kind of adjust or understand, because that was their child. They want to love them. And I think now when kids come home, there's this extra tension, and you go out of your parenting role into this political escape, and that generations have been learning from previous and past generations for so long, and we don't want to take that away from ourselves. It's such a great way to learn and to grow and to be a community.
And if you would look and focus on when it was a more Republican leaning country versus Democratic leaning country, ultimately at the end of the day, there's things that change, and you have to monitor and adjust in life. And we're all going to have to get along if we want our country to continue to be the greatest country in the world. And that's the biggest thing I think that this book shows, is that, guess what? Just because you have different ideas doesn't mean we can't be friends or romantic. That would be an interesting thing. I think that you're with your book, that you kind of go back and jump into how many people are out there that are conservatives and liberals that are dating each other, and how many of them are able to keep politics out of it. Sports, it's easy for them, right?
Yeah.
Especially if it's a big rivalry like Michigan State, Michigan, or Alabama, Auburn, or all these big college football or basketball rivalries. But why can't we do this with political? And why can't we say, just because we have these belief system, there might be just something really chemistry that could have a great relationship?
Well, it's so funny you're saying that, because one of my close friends in DC, she actually met her husband there at what we call an across the aisle romance, which is like Anna and Gabe, one's conservative, one's Democrat, and they met on the Hill. And she was saying, before we got so politicized, what used to happen is you would argue all day, then you'd go get a beer, you'd be on the same sports team, and that's how her and her husband fell in love. And the next day you'd come back to the table, and it'd be much easier to negotiate. But in today's world, she was saying, you don't do that. There's no shared drinks. There's no shared sports team. It's totally divided. And so, you're taking away that after work piece that allowed people to come together, because it's so hostile. And who knows how many romances could have happened that have not, because of that.
Yeah, well, I think that's where your book comes in, really as a lesson for all of us, not only for the teenagers, is finding those commonalities, playing on a sports team, joining a book club, and things like that is where we can find the commonalities. That's what we used to do. I mean, back, no matter when you go back politically, that's what they used to do, is go back, on TV, they're fighting, but when they go home, they're sharing apartments. The politicians are really putting everything together. It wasn't a you versus us, them, and it was an us, and figuring out really what has to get done. And that's really the power of relationships, as well as the political part.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, the best place people can purchase your book, where can they go?
Well, I always love when people go to their local independent bookstores. But you know, you can get it there. You can get it at Barnes and Noble, on Amazon, wherever you want to get it. I'd love if you checked it out. It is at heart a romantic comedy, a great summer read, and I always check my DMs. So if anyone has any questions, they can shoot me a message on Instagram too.
Well, fantastic. And like I said, I never would have thought this is the perfect timing. Because now we really are getting everyone involved in the politics right now. Perfect timing
Yes.
with the change of running, who's running
Yeah,
against
yeah,
former President Trump. That will change it because a lot of young people are talking about politics now. So this time they got to pick up the book and read it
yes,
to understand there's a history towards all this, and
yes.
you can kind of tell it based on the story. So thanks again, Emily.
Thank you so much, Neil and David. It was so great speaking with you.
All right, take care. You're
Have
listening
a
and
great
watching
day.
the Neil Haley Show, and we'll be back in just a moment.